All right, in this video, I'm going to review several of the tests or maneuvers that we perform in the office to try to determine if the rotator cuff is the cause of pain. And there are really two symptoms that we are trying to evaluate with these tests. Number one is pain, and number two is weakness. And generally, pain can be there whether you have tendonitis or a tear. The weakness is usually more of an indication of a tear. So if you've got pain and weakness, there's a decent chance that you've got a tear. If it's just pain but you don't have weakness, then it may just be tendonitis. So that's not absolutely true. There are some people that have a tear that still have good strength, and there are some people that have tendonitis that do have a lot of weakness. So it's not absolute, but as a general rule, people with weakness tend to have a tear, and people without weakness tend to have just tendonitis. So one of the first things that we're going to do is what we call an impingement test. And if you watch the video where I talked about the anatomy of the shoulder, you recognize or remember that the ball of the shoulder is not perfectly round, that there's a part of it that kind of juts out. And if we maneuver the arm in different ways, we can make that jut out part narrow the gap in between the shoulder blade, the roof, and the ball, and that can help us figure out if the rotator cuff is really causing the pain. So one of the ways that you do that is to take your hand, the affected arm, raise it palm up to about shoulder height. So you want your elbow straight, you want your arm kind of right out in front of you, and then you want to slowly turn the hand so that the thumb is pointed down at the floor. And when you do that movement, what's really happening is the shoulder up here is rotating, and we're driving that prominent part that sticks out up underneath the shoulder blade. And if the rotator cuff gets pinched in between there, a lot of times that will cause pain. There are different positions that isolate or emphasize different parts of the shoulder. So when we go straight in front, so I'm coming straight at the camera like this, that position is what we call forward flexion. The other position is straight to the side, so in line with your body, and then turning the thumb down. And then the third position is about halfway in between. So I'm not going straight in the front, I'm not going straight out to the side, I'm about halfway in between. If you read literature, medical literature, they actually say that you want to be about 30 degrees instead of 45, but somewhere in this range is good enough for our purposes. So you're going to come up, either palm up or thumb up, and then you're going to turn thumb down. And that movement, if the rotator cuff is irritated, tends to cause pain. The second one is what we call the drop arm test. So you may need to use your other hand to do this, especially if you've got a lot of pain. So you want to take your hand all the way overhead, and then you want to start to slowly lower it. And sometimes you'll be able to lower it to a point about here, and then all of a sudden your arm just gives way and falls to the ground. Again, I think it's useful to test this in all three positions. So go straight up the front and come down. And what you want to try to do is lower it under control all the way down. Again, go all the way to the top. Now come to the side and try to lower it all the way down. And then do this halfway position, what we call the scapular plane. And you want to bring it all the way down. And again, what frequently will happen if you've got a rotator cuff problem is you will be able to lower it initially because you're using your deltoid muscle to do that. But then once you get to a certain point, the rotator cuff takes over for what the deltoid was doing. And if the rotator cuff can't do it, then your arm suddenly falls down to the side. So that's the drop arm test. The next one is the external rotation test. And I'm going to move this camera a little bit so that you can get a better view of what I'm doing here. It helps to do this with a door frame. So it's best to test this with your good arm first, You want to get even with the door frame. So my hip is even with the door frame right here. Elbow at my side, so right like this. And then I'm going to put the back of my hand on this door and push. And I should feel it up here in the shoulder. If that's painful, or if you really can't push with any power at all, then that's a problem with the rotator cuff on the back part, probably the supraspinatus or the infraspinatus. And then I'm going to switch arms just so you can still see with the camera, but you're going to do the same thing going the other direction. So again, hips even with the door frame. Now I'm going to put my palm on the door frame and I'm going to push in. This is testing the rotator cuff muscles on the front, primarily the subscapularis. So that should be painful or weak if you are struggling with a subscapularis problem. You can do the same thing in the air. It's not quite as effective, but it does simulate that same thing. So in order to do that, you're going to bend your elbow 90 degrees and you're going to raise your elbow to shoulder height. And your hand is basically right out here in front of your face. So initially you want to push down with this hand and you're going to push up with the other hand. So I'm going to use my thumb like this just so you can see. And so I want to resist that pressure by pushing down with my shoulder and hand. So that is, again, testing the pushing in on the door frame. So that's subscapularis. You can do the same thing by pushing down, and you push up with this hand into that, and that's testing primarily your supraspinatus and your infraspinatus. So that movement is very similar to what we do with the door frame. The third test that you can do on your own is called the lift-off test. So you're going to take your hand and you're going to put it behind your back as far up as you can. Well, not all the way up by your shoulder blades, but you want it to be about even with your elbow. So you see where my hand is now, right about my pants line or waist. And then I want to slowly try to bring my hand away from my back. So if you can't do this at all, then that's clearly a subscapularis problem. The other modification for this is what we call a belly press test. So you put your hand on your belly and you push in. And what happens if your subscapularis is weak, as you push here, your elbow goes forward like that because your arm can't generate the pressure here, and so it's using other muscles to do that. And so what you see happen is your elbow flies forward. So you want to just press your hand into your belly as hard as you can. And you can do it on the other hand, the good hand, to try to give you a point of reference or to practice doing it properly so you'll recognize how you're doing it different on one side versus the other. So those are the self-tests. The next video, I'm going to talk about some of the tests that you can do with another person helping you because some of these you just can't get into the right position by yourself.